If psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
There is a sort of pendulum that's swinging back and forth where we kind of go from one extreme.
And I think there's an element of truth
because
to this.
I have something interesting later in the show that will make you feel very weird.
From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Verhaagen in Nashville. We have a great show for you, and I mean a great show. Our trending topic today is the psychology of Howard Stern. But first, we're going to meet our Charlotte panel. Dr. Emma Kate Wright is out today, and Dr. Frank Gaskell's with us. And Frank, I know you are a big Howard Stern superfan. But before we talk about him, is there any other radio that you listen to regularly? Radio is kind of a medium that is I don't want to say dying, but it's in trouble. Do you listen to any other radio shows?
I listen to NPR, and that's it.
That's all.
But I will only listen to NPR if I have listened to the two channels of Stern, and usually I'll still listen to it again for about the fourth or fifth time. So I rarely listen to NPR unless it's like a commercial.
I listen to a local station here in Nashville called Lightning 100, which is a pretty cool station, somewhat regularly, but not much. But I realized I used to listen to the radio all the time. I used to be on the radio. I used to listen to it all the time. And this year I was working on my Song of the Summer prediction. And I realized I'm so out of touch with music that I'm really struggling to do this because I just don't listen to radio like I used to. And in fact, when I listen to Sirius, a lot of times if it's not Howard Stern, it's going to be a television station. Like I'll listen to CNN or something on the radio.
I do that too.
Yeah,
I go back and forth between CNN and MSNBC.
Yeah. And Jonathan Hetterly is here. He's our certified Asian who rounds out the panel. Jonathan, same question for you. Do you listen to radio at all?
Not at all. Haven't listened to radio since the invention of
the wheel?
iTunes and the iPod. And once I could curate all my music in one device, like to me, playlists and any album far exceeded any desire to listen to radio and commercials. So I probably haven't listened to radio for a good 15 plus years.
But you listen to podcasts, which is sort of like this generation's radio.
I do. I probably regularly listen to, I don't know, a dozen or so podcasts ranging from fantasy football to movie reviews to psychology. I guess in the spirit of what this Howard Stern guy attempts to do on radio, I there's an equivalent, I guess, that I'm able to enjoy for free since, podcasts are free.
Free.
Huh.
Yeah.
Free. Yeah.
Well, each week, Jonathan trolls around the internet and he finds a great story of psychology in the news for the first segment that we call
Be Human.
Frank, you should appreciate this research here.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me about it,
Well,
Hetterly.
it's about attachment theory, Frank, which is one of the most influential theories in psychology. It argues for the importance of our earliest relationships with our caregivers and predicts that these formative bonds will shape the nature of our connections with other people for the rest of our lives. Now, in a recently published paper in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, there is research that's trying to document how attachment styles varies on average through the decades of the lifespan. They gathered data from 5 historic projects, and they really focused in on 14 key items to compile scores for anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. Now, people who score highly on anxious attachment, they fear rejection and constantly seek reassurance. Are you still following me, Frank?
Okay. Reassurance, yes,
and
yes.
People who score highly on avoidant attachment find intimacy uncomfortable and find it difficult to provide emotional support to others.
What's that like, Hetterly?
I don't know.
Okay.
Now, low scores in both anxiety and avoidance is a sign of having a secure attachment style. Now, the researchers found that people's anxious attachments tended to be high in adolescence, increasing into their young adulthood before declining through life into their middle and old age. Now, people with avoidant attachment, they showed less change with age, but they started higher in adolescence and then declined in linear fashion through life. Now get this, Frank. Another
yes,
finding
please.
from the study was that at all times of life, being in a close romantic relationship tended to go hand in hand with scoring lower on attachment anxiety and avoidance. Franklin, what do you make of this study about attachment?
Well, I'm glad I read it because I've never thought about how attachment styles can change outside the context of therapy, which we're going to get into with Howard Stern. But it makes a lot of sense in that when kids leave the nest, they're used to being close with their parents and they head off. They're going to get kind of anxious when they're out there on their own. And then it speaks to when you're sort of in your middle age, you are really connected socially. You found purpose. You have this role to play, which is going to further reduce attachment. And then the elderly are very much in the here and now, not in the what's next. It's almost like a mindfulness. So it's interesting to see how that curve works. And even with the avoidant style, which basically means you're not going to let people in. You're going to have sort of this wall. You're going to let go of things easily, walk away from things easily. Then it seems that that's sort of a self-reinforcing process where the anxious attachment is checking, and will get more data than necessarily the avoidant person would. So I thought it was fascinating.
I'll tell you, I think this is going to be an area of big research interest in the coming decade because for the past probably 50, 60 years, attachment theory and attachment ideas have been kind of accepted almost as gospel. You know, it's like, this is it. You have this attachment style. It forms in childhood. It persists across the lifespan. And I think some of the newer research is suggesting maybe these attachment styles aren't as clear and maybe they can change in ways that we didn't think before, not just in therapeutic contexts, but just in relationships. And it makes sense because, you know, you think about, you can be in a certain kind of close relationship and be much more anxious and it show up as an anxious looking attachment, or other relationships where you're kind of finding yourself putting up more boundary or pushing away a little bit. There's this dynamic between you and the other person that shifts things. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. By the way, here's a cool thing. There was a study that found that when you hook up people with anxious attachment style and people with an avoidant attachment style to biofeedback machines, that when they're in a setting where something's happening in their relationship, like there's an argument or there's some kind of conflict, they both have the same level of autonomic arousal. They both are anxious. There's really, it's really two different expressions of anxiety. So we're looking at those things as different things, but they actually might be just same song, different verse, or different expressions of the same thing. No.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear from both of you, you know, how your how your attachment has changed from your childhood to your adolescence to your adulthood. If you guys remember what it was like when you were in your middle age and now that you're in the elderly, stage.
That was a long setup.
That was a long walk.
Yeah, you finally got there.
Well, your guys' life has been a long walk. There's not that many steps left. So I'm just curious, has your attachment style changed? Because I only know you guys during these like the light dimming stage of life.
We're really just digging in.
I'm just curious.
Here. I mean, I know mine has changed. I mean, I'm in therapy working on it right now, but I used to not be able to do certain things alone, which I'm able to do now. Fill in the blank with whatever you want to think of that. But I think the biggest change for me is I know when it's happening. I know, okay, I'm feeling the need for fill in the blank. I need to check. I need to be like, I'm aware of it. Whereas, a week ago, I wasn't aware of it.
A week ago.
Yeah,
wow.
more like
that recent.
10 to 12 years ago, I wasn't aware of it.
So, Frank, I'm going to ask you this question. So, in the hundreds of years that we've known each other, do you think my attachment style has changed?
No, I don't. I mean, if I was going to land on where you would fall on the continuum, it'd be a little bit of avoidant. But I think you're pretty good to go. You haven't changed a whole lot since I was 18.
That sounds creepy.
It sounds really creepy.
That sounds really.
When I went to when I bought ice cream from you for the first time,
Right? Yeah, from my ice cream truck.
What is your opinion about yourself?
I don't think it has. That's why I asked you the question, because I don't want to be like ignorant about myself and say,
right.
But I feel like I would say I'm a securely attached person. And if I had a leaning, it would lean a little bit toward avoidant.
Yeah.
Like I tend to be a little heavier on the boundaries. But
I think in your stage of demise, the only thing that's changed is you're just a little more curmudgeon.
yeah, I think that's more this week. I've been more curmudgeonly this week.
Boy, everything is this week. Like my attachment this week. Breakthrough. I've decided to become more curmudgeony this week.
It's a significant week for us. So
It is a big week, huh?
Gotcha.
Well, we're going to shift gears and talk about our trending topic. But if you have a thought or question or idea and you want to get in touch with us about attachment styles, we'd love to hear from you. You can tweet us at shrink_tank, or you can write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. We're going to talk about our trending topic, which is the psychology of Howard Stern. He has a brand new book, Howard Stern Comes Again, just came out this week, and it gives us an opportunity to talk about it. But before we do, a couple of things. First, Frank is on a behavior plan there in the Charlotte office, which is that he cannot say anything about Howard Stern, I think, more than 4 times. Is that correct?
No. I can only make 3 references per day.
3 references.
But I have a pass today.
Right. For this window of time only.
True. I'm at number 2.
And
I have 1 to give.
And so when you violate the terms, what is your
Howard
punishment?
Stern.
I get waxed.
What does that mean?
Which has happened. It happened once, and my hair really didn't quite grow back. I think at my age, when you lose the hair, it's like, oh, well, it's not going to come back. So I have this nice rectangle on my leg.
On your leg.
Yeah.
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 Glad we have such good boundaries at our office
Yes.
with
It was
waxing
terrifying.
Frank's leg.
They all yelled 4, and for some odd reason, we have wax strips at the office, and they ran and waxed me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I'm going to propose. Since you are a fan and I am a fan, although not in the league that you're in, but we both are, and Jonathan knows nothing or relatively nothing, and I don't think cares to know a whole lot about Howard Stern. He and I are going to switch places, and he's going to anchor this segment.
Oh, fun.
And ask us about Howard Stern. So is that fair?
Oh, this is exciting.
All right.
This is
Yes,
great.
A little, yeah,
All right.
switching it up. I
A
mean,
little switcheroo.
I'm very happy that Howard Stern has graduated from America's Got Talent as one of the judges, that he got this new radio gig. Congratulations, Howard. But for those who don't know, Frank, like me, people that still have a large portion of their life ahead of them, why don't you describe the Howard Stern show for our audience?
Okay, I will describe it briefly in 2 parts. There is pre-serious and post-serious.
And you mean serious radio.
Well, and I also mean pre and post therapy as well. Howard was an insane person by his own description. He was literally insane and incapable of caring for another person. He was obsessed with competing, with winning at all costs. He was a complete disaster, shock jock. It was unbelievable. Then he got a divorce. He went into therapy, first once a week, then all the way up to 4 times a week. And what he says is fascinating. His first therapy session was, well, I don't want to get too much into that, but basically he was doing shtick. And the psychiatrist said, that's not funny, that's really sad, as he was describing his family history. And so now the Stern Show, he's up to around 2,000, 3,000 interviews of A-list celebrities, but it's sort of a gang of idiots. They still do pranks, they do phony phone calls, they do all the kind of wacky stuff, But there are also these hour to hour and a half long form interviews that are super in depth. And because now Stern is open, he's willing to be open, then it allows these guests to come in and say things they have never said publicly before.
And the other thing,
yeah.
The other thing I'll add to that is you alluded to this when you said a gang of idiots, but it really is a community. It is Howard Stern's the center of it. Robin Quivers is in that center as well, but it really is a kind of a community of people that have to do everything, everyone from his producer to his limo driver to super fans to
the guy that dresses him.
Right, you name it. And they all play it's like a drama, or like a Russian novel almost, with all these different like people who are interconnected with each other. And so that's part of the appeal of it as well. It's him, especially him as an interviewer, but it is the appeal is that you feel like you're part of this inside this community.
Yeah, it's like a family.
Yeah.
And you feel as if you really, really know them. And they let you into their lives, and they just tell you the most amazing, intimate things that you'd really only tell a friend.
So help me understand, because you mentioned the role of therapy in his life, but how has that really shaped him? Because you use that example that he tells a joke and the therapist says, "That's not funny, that's sad." Like, how did he respond to that? And does he have that? When did he start to have that ability that his coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms were really kind of hiding and protecting him from this unresolved pain that he was experiencing?
Well, he says in that first session when the psychiatrist said that to him, he was angry, defensive, but he kept coming back. And then he realized after about 4 sessions that the psychiatrist said, "Howard, I take you seriously." And he said that just took him aback because he'd never been taken seriously by his dad. I mean, he's got pretty horrific emotional trauma from his childhood. And while they speak of it as narcissism, and I'm sure that's there, I couch it more in the realm of attachment.
And you said this already too, but it was the first therapy session. That's what he writes about.
Yeah.
Is
the very first therapy.
Right. The first time he walks in,
first.
he said, "I don't know how therapy works. And so I'm going to go in there and tell stories and do shtick, basically. So like I have this thing about my marriage and I have this shtick about my family and about my, and so he's sitting there kind of like his conception of how therapy is supposed to work is I'm going to go in there and just tell all these stories and I'm going to do these sort of prepackaged things. And that's when the therapist kind of hits him and says, that doesn't sound that funny. Like he's doing it for comedic effect. And then he starts to kind of get in and it was very, I think still is more old school psychodynamic therapy. It's really it's not the, I'm having panic attacks. Here's some, steps to avoid panic. It's like deep personality work where you're really like getting in there and you're meeting multiple times a week and all that kind of stuff. But I will say the book starts off with that and it's the tone setter for the entire book. And by the way, I'll just jump ahead and say, I think this book has the possibility of being one of my favorite books ever.
Me too.
Because I love...
Oh, that's a shock.
I love I love interviews with funny people. Like I love, you remember Judd Apatow had a book called Sick in the Head, same idea, but I love these interviews with funny people. And this is funny people and going to a deep level, both. So it's very cool. But what I will say is the book sets the tone for that opening sets the tone for the entire book, which is... It
really does.
Therapy changed me. And here's how it changed me. Before, my interviews were not interviews. They were monologues. They were me talking about myself or calling attention to myself or making it about me. And once I learned from therapy how to be in this reciprocal kind of relationship with someone and how to really be empathetic and care, it showed up in my ability to have a good interview. And it does. I mean, you can see the progression. I remember when I first moved to Philadelphia for my internship year, and he was on the radio. The guy then and the guy now it's the same guy, but the depth of interviewing is something extraordinary.
It really is. And I first started listening to Howard in Philly as well. And I actually have a piece on shrinktank.com. This is from a while back where I wrote about the two Howards, because there really are two. And on CBS this morning, he said, there's still a really angry guy in there, but at least we can talk to each other a little bit, which I thought was cool. But I'll tell you, in the intro where he's talking about therapy and the tone is really serious, it's also, there are hilarious moments. I'm just going to read this one quote. I laughed out loud. And he never, it's weird because he doesn't want to brag about stuff, but he says, these in-depth interviews, that's what I'm most proud of. It's one of the things I want to be remembered for before I die of a non-cancerous cyst, which is hilarious.
Right.
Because that's what happened. I think maybe, Dave, you remember I said about 2 years ago, there's something wrong with Howard.
You did, yeah. That is, and by the way, I think that is fascinating because right around the time when he was going through this, and it was not public, and he wasn't talking about it, you said something's going on with him. Something's wrong with him.
Right.
But that's what stalkers know. They just know when their prey is like weakened.
That's what he announced the book. He said, I had to write this book because I've lied to my audience. And I've been lying for 2 years. And I went, what? There was something going on.
So with that big cancer scare, how do you think that's continued to affect his development and just how he sort of views himself and his life?
Well, it's pretty significant in that he really rethought what his values were, his priorities, what he wants his life to be about. It was really part of this whole journey that he had started in therapy of just becoming a real boy, as we would say, and
I'm a real boy.
Right. And it has shown up in his real relationships from what we can tell. And it has shown up again in his work, in the quality of his work. And so he's one of these guys that having that experience was a thing that caused him to reevaluate really significant parts of his life and who he was and who he wanted to be, what his legacy, that he wanted his legacy to become.
Go ahead. Well, Dave,
I'll add one other thing to that. That people will read, it was a non-cancerous cyst on his kidney. But that's not really how that impacted him. It was how Robin Quivers, who's his sidekick, who does the news, she almost died from cancer.
And had a horrific treatment bout. Like the bout of treatment was just horrible.
Nightmare. Mm-hmm. Nightmare. And I think he immediately, because he's very OCD, he's very anxious, he immediately went, I'm going to die. And then he couldn't get out of that headspace.
And it deepened his, like he was in it with Robin, and they cried a lot together, and they were in it together. But I think part of what he says is having had the scare, even though it ended up not being cancer, having the scare increasingly deepened his respect for Robin. Like, how did you do this? How did you go through this?
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those sort of deepening things that deepened empathy, his ability to take perspective, all of that. So it has, I think, made him a better person.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dave, I have a question more for you. I'm sure Frank can chime in. When I think about Howard Stern and some of the feedback I've gotten from other people that don't necessarily either know a lot about Howard Stern, don't listen to him, or he's not their cup of tea, they recognize that he is hailed as a great interviewer. But they also have this awareness that he will also have these segments that are immensely vulgar or crude. I mean, Frank will come around, we'll go grab lunch, and we'll be listening to Howard Stern, and there'll be a segment on someone going to a fisting convention to where someone will stick their whole arm up somebody's
yes.
All the way to their shoulder.
And I'm making our editor, Sean Beck, have to do a lot of bleeping out right now. But I'm just curious, Dave, how do you reconcile that part in terms of enjoying it? Or is that just a part that you take the good with the bad? Or am I misrepresenting that you really like that really vulgar, very sexualized type of humor?
Well, I will tell you, I don't, and not that much. And I don't tend to listen to that part of the show. Like if there are 2 Howard Stern channels, and if I have an opportunity to listen and that's going on, I just don't tend to listen to that much. I will just go to listen to CNN or something like that if I'm going to, or an audiobook. So but what really is appealing to me are the interviews. That's really it. Some of those other bits, they're just, I mean, they can be funny, and they can, I mean, he can get to some really funny places, but they're just not that appealing to me. So I don't tend to listen to that. So it's almost like in my head, I sort of segment that stuff out from the interviews, which the appeal for me is really the celebrity interview stuff. That's
the celebrity
totally
interviews. Good for Dave. The sounds that men make when they're being fisted on live radio. That's not Dave's cup of tea.
Not as much. Let's just say not as much.
And okay, and so I very, very much may have a very distorted view of Howard Stern, like a lot of people, because that's pretty much all that Frank plays for me when we're driving and getting food. It's like, here, check out this, and then I hear this, and I'm just like, okay, thank you, Frank. You've made something of my day. I don't know how to describe it.
But I think the things that I will tell you are an 11. And most of the stuff he's doing is not that. He'll do really funny phone calls. They have puppets. They do puppet shows, and so I'd say that's that vulgar piece. The percentage of how much he does that on a show is way less than it used to be. Way less.
And I guess that's my final question for you all as we wrap up this segment is, in the era of Me Too, or we've talked a lot about the oversensitivity of our culture, how does Howard get away with it? Why does Howard seem to have Teflon when it comes to jokes around the mentally challenged or handicapped, very sexualized and objectifying jokes around women or sex? And again, I'm saying this, I'm sort of commentating from an outsider looking in, but I don't see Howard Stern really getting a lot of negative call out. Why?
Well, he has never coerced anybody to do anything. That's number one. Number two, he is one of the most, believe it or not, pro-LGBTQ, pro-women's rights. He's very vocal about equal pay. I mean, he's really hardcore social justice dude. And even like this sounds ridiculous, but there's a person in the whack pack. There are these group of people that are just bizarre. And there's Wendy, and he used to call her Wendy the retard. And since sort of this change, he now calls her Wendy the slow adult, which is an improvement.
It's an improvement.
But I would also say, and a lot of these people that he's had around him over the years, he's done some things for their lives that never would have happened. I mean, he's elevated them to celebrity status, given they have income, but they're in on the joke as much as anybody. But he's very he's a social warrior, animal rights, everything.
I would agree with that as well, that underneath all of it, he really is a champion for the gay community, for women, for you name it. I mean, he really is. And so that any apart from someone who's just the most cursory or casual listener, anybody who listens to it with any regularity knows that. So that's the first. But the other is, and this is a premise that I've thrown out there before, is I think there are some people in this very politically correct culture, this is that, and this is Donald Trump. They just fly above it. In other words, they're so out there and they so don't care that you can't touch them in that way. You know, they're not going to be like, oh, I apologize for saying this. I apologize for saying that. It's kind of like they're already trafficking in that strata that's so out there that what are you going to call? You're going to call him out for every single thing he's ever, you know, like for any random 15-minute period of a show that's lasted for 30 years, and he doesn't care. So I think that's a big piece of it.
That's me.
That's kind of Frank.
That's what I do.
Frank and Howard Stern, equal rights for fisters. That's the 2020 campaign slogan.
Oh man,
the FistCon wasn't as bad as LeatherCon. I'll tell you that much.
Okay.
We really need some bleeping out on this episode. For sure. For sure. Extra work for Sean Beck. Well, if you have a specific question or comment about Howard Stern, we'd love to hear from you. You can tweet us at shrink_tank or write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. And our final segment, something that we call Doctor's Orders. These are things that we're personally enjoying in pop culture. Frank, do you have something for us?
Yes. I have read, I'm up around 35 pages of Howard's new book, and I want to recommend Howard Stern Comes Again. It is the top seller on Amazon, and it's fascinating to actually read the interviews because you can actually see how he structures his conversation with these people.
Jonathan.
I have 2 TV shows I want to recommend. One is called Dead to Me. It's a Netflix show. It's a dark comedy starring Christina Applegate and Linda Cardellini, I believe is how you pronounce her name. It's got really sharp humor. It's really about flawed adults and a friendship that is emerging in the midst of secrets. I highly enjoy it. And then I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there's a show called Game of Thrones on HBO that people seem to be talking about. And there seems to be very mixed and polarizing views about this final season. But one show on HBO that is not polarizing is Barry, season 2 with Bill Hader, Henry Winkler. I think this show is flawless. I didn't think it could build off a solid, spectacular first season, but it may be better than the first season. It certainly has gotten darker and more nuanced, but I highly recommend folks check it out if you haven't already. Barry, season 2 on HBO.
I think it is definitely better. The first season was great. I think this season's even better. There's one episode in Barry that's called Ronnie/Lily that honestly is one of my favorite episodes of any television show ever. It is outrageous. I love it. I'm going to recommend an HBO show that's darker in some ways, much heavier, Chernobyl. I wasn't that interested in it, but HBO was promoting it so heavily around Game of Thrones that I thought they think they've got a ringer here, and I gave it a watch. It's a really good show, and it's
really good.
It's fascinating, well worth watching. So I'd recommend Chernobyl to you. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. If you like this episode, you can help our podcast grow by giving us a good rating on iTunes and also telling your friends to subscribe. And if you didn't like it, you can tell us why, and you can give us feedback by emailing us at feedback@shrinktank.com. For more content exploring the intersection of psychology and pop culture, you can visit shrinktank.com. We have great articles and videos there, and you have links to our Doctor's Orders products and social media profiles. And you can check out the description box or show notes of this video. You can follow us on Twitter at @shrink_tank and like us on Facebook. And if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love for you to subscribe. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can check out the description box below. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck. Our associate producer and social media guru is Mariel Butler. And our marketing intern and rubber ducky enthusiast is Sarah Bradley. For Jonathan Hetterly and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhaagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.
Shrink Tank.